I've had employers send me around the globe, and they never quite understand it when they call me and it's 2 o'clock and they're like, "What are you doing?" "I'm sitting in the hotel room." I go, "You what?" "I'm getting a nap because I was out this morning and I'm going out again this evening." But there's no point going out and making subpar photos because the light sucks. Exactly. Right? You can scout around, you can meet people, you can do all kinds of things, get to know the areas, see what you'd like to go shoot later. You can do all those things. But the picture taking, save it till when the light's good. A little aside from what I'm going to talk about, but I worked in the newspaper business for the better part of 3 decades. And the way I like to describe newspapering to people is that you're making the best of a bad situation. And I remember being out on an oil rig in the North Atlantic with, I landed in a chopper. I knew I had 1 night on the rig. And there to greet me was a photographer with National Geographic. And one sec. National Geographic, and he had been on for 4 days already, and he was going to spend another 3 or 4 days on board. And he said, "I'm not even shooting today because it sucks." And I'm like, "I know, but I'm shooting today because that's all I got." So I made the best of a bad situation, and that's newspapering. But anyways, good tour, sir. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Pete. So apologies to people in the room. I'm just going to be addressing this camera for now, so don't feel offended. To my students at Conestoga, thanks for coming. I can't hear you at the moment. We've got the wonderful McKenna over there listening to your audio. So if you need to talk to some or say something, please say something or yell, or I guess the chat is up. So if you see something on the chat as well, you can flag me down. So today, actually, I can't hear you, but McKenna will hear you. Mo, is there anything you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to everyone, and I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person for the Lambton College students, and I'm glad that Peter is able to deliver, and I'm sure they're very excited. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me? Peter, can you hear me okay?
Can you say that again, Mo? Sorry. We're
okay.
going to pump your audio into the room as well.
Sorry, guys. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much for the opportunity for us to bring to you today a great speaker, photojournalist Peter Power. And I'm sure it'll be a fascinating session today. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it in person, but I'm sure next time we'll be able to come out and see you. At Sony, we definitely want to support the next generation of content creators. We want to make sure that we're there to support you by building relationship, offering great products, and ensuring that we're supporting in any way possible. So absolutely, I'll be on the call. If you have any question, use a chat to reach out. But I'll turn over to Peter and Jeff, and thanks again, guys, for your time.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Mo. Really appreciate it. So the way this is going to go is we're here at Lambton in the studio with a whole whack of our in-person students. I'm sorry to rub this into you Conestoga people. Yes, we are in person. You will be next semester. So we're here in the studio here at Lambton. We've got Peter Power, renowned photojournalist, Canadian legend, video guy who had a video said, "Who is Peter Power?" And then they went around asking people on the street if they knew who Peter Power was, and nobody knew who you were.
Thank you, David Chidley.
Yes. So anyways, Pete's going to do a presentation here on storytelling. I'm going to try to just stick my nose out of it and run this from behind the scenes. But if you do have a question or whatever, please let me know, and I will be listening into your questions, and I can relay that on to Peter. Yeah, so feel free to stop at any time and ask a question or throw it in the chat. And hopefully, hopefully this will go well. I have no idea doing this hybrid thing.
It's going great. It's going to be good.
It's going to be good. Okay, off to Peter. Peter Power.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. Hello again, everybody in the room, and hi to the students at Conestoga online. Thanks for joining us. Quick technical question, Jeff. The long lens camera, that's only on me here, and the other one I can wander. I tend to want to wander, so I'm going to do that.
We've got the YE on you.
Okay.
So it's 24, or sorry.
I forgot my Fitbit, and I'm trying to get my 10,000 steps in just by talking to you guys, but it's not going to count. So I'm frustrated by that. Thanks for the introduction, Jeff. Thanks, Mo, for having me do this today. And thank you all for attending. Just a little bit about myself. I started my photographic career, my life as a photographer in high school. I grew up in Newfoundland, and we were doing an exchange trip with a school in Vancouver. And that school came to visit us in our little community in Newfoundland. And the guy who stayed with me had a little point-and-shoot 35mm camera, and it was great. And I just loved what he was doing. And my mother said, "You got to get a camera to go to Vancouver with." So we went to the store, and we started looking at cameras. And I wanted just a little point-and-shoot because I didn't want to spend money. We were of modest means. And she insisted on buying me an SLR camera with interchangeable lenses, and the rest was history. I was pretty much hooked at that point. And then I went off to university. Well, I went off to the military and ended up at military college, where I was introduced to the darkroom. And I don't know what the equivalent is today, but you'll relate. Jeff will relate. You gentlemen will probably relate. The first time you're in a darkroom and you drop an exposed piece of paper into the developer and you see that print start to come up, there's no looking back. It's magic, okay? It really is magic. And that was where I was sold. And of course, my degree in electrical engineering got sort of pushed off to the side, and I was out taking photos of the rugby team when I should have been studying, and one thing led to the other. I flunked out and ended up in journalism school. And I haven't looked back. It's been a great ride ever since. Very short time after that, ended up at the Toronto Star, had an amazing 17 years there. What I wanted to do with my career at that point was changing. The Toronto Star was very much about news, sports, features, business, but we didn't do a lot of multiple image storytelling. And I had gotten to the point in my career where that's what really started to interest me. And I knew that I was a storyteller. My mother, who's listening, I hope, I used to drive her crazy because I would go see a movie as a boy, and I'd come home and my mother would make the mistake of saying, "How was the film?" And I would recount the whole film because I wanted to tell stories. So I still do that today, but I do it with images. So I got an offer from the Globe and Mail, and in newspaper photography, you don't get raises. And the only way I could get a raise and change my career was to move papers, so I did. And at the Globe and Mail, I was given many opportunities to generate my own ideas for stories, and to work on stories that were coming from other sources, other writers, etc. And it was really, really a great almost 8 years at the Globe and Mail. And a lot of the work that I'm most proud of in my career actually came from that period. And not because of the images, but because of the experiences of working on teams, spending more time on stories that I felt mattered and hopefully made a small difference in the world. And then, of course, in 2014, with the downturn in the newspaper business, most of us got laid off, and I sort of had to reinvent myself, which has worked out quite nicely. So I'm now doing editorial work still. I still do stories on my own when I can, and I've added to that now. I also do corporate video, corporate annual report work, etc. I like to describe it like this. You need to survive in life, right? And the corporate work, is that me that's doing that? Should I move this? The corporate work feeds your account, and the editorial work feeds your soul. And I find that's very true for the work that I do. The last time I gave a talk like this on storytelling with multiple images, I showed a lot of the work that I've done on what I consider to be a little bit harder hitting, dramatic stories, social issues, health issues, mental health, etc. And that's all valid. But what I'm going to try to do today is I'll lead in with a little bit of that. I'll lead in, I seem to get it here, but not back there. So is there something I can do differently?
Well, the speaker's right above you. You're sort of in between the two of them.
All right.
I can turn turn you down in the room.
Okay. So I'll talk a little bit about some of those stories that are harder to do. If you can't hear me, let me know, and we can talk about this mask thing at some point if you need to. But whether you're storytelling on a documentary that takes a lot of time, that's really hard to get access and to deal with people, and it's emotionally draining and stuff, whether you're doing that, or if you're working on a simple afternoon story at the local ice rink, all of the elements for visual storytelling are the same. All right, the approaches are a little different in some cases, the difficulty of them, how you present them might be different, but the basic elements for visual storytelling are the same, okay? So if you just look up here right now, oh, by the way, here's the rules today. When I'm talking, please feel free to interrupt, okay? If you have a question, just blurt it out. And there's no stupid questions. If you have a comment, a question, anything like that. I'm going to be showing you my images, and not because they're good or anything like that, but they're images that I can speak to the circumstances surrounding them. And once we all get to the point where we're comfortable with our cameras, with exposure theory, how to capture a moment, good composition and such, all right? Those things start to become very second nature to you. I know it doesn't feel like that for you right now, but that's going to happen for you eventually. I apologize, I'm not talking to you folks, and I should as well. So what is different then is how you approach people and how you approach stories, and when you can get in someone's face comfortably, and when you should back off and give them space. And all of those things sort of come with your own personality, but you also have to learn them over time and adapt, okay? But again, the basic rules apply. This slide that's up on the board right now, I wanted to show because it encompasses a little bit of the elements to visual storytelling that's important. This was a story I did at a palliative care home where people were going to die, essentially. I've done 2 such stories in my career, and none of them are easy. And I don't normally get emotional with this one, but for some reason I am right now. It must be COVID. I'm going to use COVID as my excuse. This is the kind of story where you have to approach people very gingerly, but honestly, to talk about what you want, what you're hoping to do, and how you're hoping to do it. The major thing here was to get permission from the hospice to be present. And then from there, it was up to me to create the relationships with the families in order to be able to make pictures that tell the story. I had one family that agreed, right? And that's all you need. And then I worked with that one family. And then eventually the other people in the building started to see how I was working. They started to get used to me being around. And then they started to approach me and saying, just making conversation, and then saying, hey, you know, I've talked to my mom, and if it's okay if you photograph us. Or I've talked to my dad, it's okay if you photograph us. And then slowly but surely, you start to ingratiate yourself and get some trust. The same thing happened with the first story I did years ago at a place called Ian Anderson House in Oakville. And there was 6 families in the place. I had the permission to shoot one. And by the time we were done, I photographed all 6 families. Now, the difficult thing about a story involving people dying is that a very important part of the story is the death, okay? And trying to get to the point where you can photograph that and make it a beautiful moment, or capture a beautiful moment, because actually it's sad as hell, but it can be very beautifully done, okay? And trying to get them to understand that takes a little bit of doing, all right? But it's important, right? You can't do a story about a butcher if we never see the butcher carving the beef. We can't do a story about a family who's raising a child with disabilities if we never show the negative sides, the hard things, the crying, the tantrums, you know, mom's stressed out and wanting to pull her hair out, etc. You have to show the downsides in order to show the upsides, the victories, and why we do it, right? So you have to consider the story, all right? When you're telling a story, you want to make sure you're presenting a story that's visually interesting to the reader, has information for the reader, and it keeps the reader interested from the first image to the last image. And one of the ways you do that is simply by mixing up the scale of your subjects, your composition, and possibly your techniques, okay? But at the same time, you want to have something that's thematically consistent and looks like they all belong together in a group, okay? We'll talk more about that as we go. Yes?
So do you work with the writer, or is it you that composes it, you collaborate with someone else on the writer? Like, how does those two go together? Because
So
it's your story, isn't it? Or is it just a collaboration?
well, that's a great question. And in this case, both the writer and I approached the story together. And we had conversations about what are your needs, what are your needs. And she went when she needed to be there. I went when I needed to be there. When I suddenly got access to another family, it was like, hey, you got to come talk to this family. They want to be a part of this. They have a great story to tell. So it's really a collaboration, and you have to remember that. Now, that being said, it's a great question. In the newspaper business, which has been very good to me, and I loved it, don't get me wrong, okay? But in the newspaper business, it traditionally runs on the almighty word, okay? Writers get promoted to editors, get promoted to managers and senior people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of it is word driven. And as a photographer, as a visual person, I've spent my entire career trying to get senior editors to respect the role of the photographers on staff, and now the videographers as well, to bring more than just to show up and illustrate the story. And I think I've been successful in doing that. And a lot of photographers of my generation have gone away from just the tell me what to shoot mentality to being more of a participant, okay? But what always happens is there'll be a meeting and they'll say, so-and-so has a great story she's been working on for 2 months, and we're gonna run it next weekend. Can we get some photos? And now the poor photography department is running around like chickens with their heads cut off, trying to scramble to get really good images that go beyond just a simple basic portrait, right? If you look at newspapers today, not the best ones, but most of them, and you flip through, you'll see a portrait, a portrait, a portrait, a portrait. And the reason for that is because they're not giving the visual people the time to actually go and capture real images to go along with those stories. So we end up posing people and doing portraits. There's nothing wrong with it, but it can be done so much better. And the best newspapers, the best storytelling newspapers in the world do it that way. At the Globe, we were doing it that way, I think. I'm not entirely sure they have the same time and budget to do so anymore, but we did for a while. So it's great to be a bit of it, part of it. So there's a story in here. Let's just change the slide so you have something to look at. I'll come back to what I wanted to show you. That's not going to play audio anyway, is it, Jeff? Yeah, I'm going to stop it. I'm not going to do it. Okay. I don't have it in here, but quickly, I had a story that I wanted to do in Toronto at the Bloorview Kids Hospital, and we ended up calling it Children of BIRT, B-I-R-T, meaning Brain Injury Rehab Therapy. And it was a story about children who had suffered traumatic brain injuries and were recovering. And it was about them and their families. And I got hold of the story because I had made friends with one of the people that worked at the hospital, and I didn't want to tell the newspaper that I had this story, to your point exactly. So I held it close. I started going and meeting families. I was shooting stills, but I was recording audio. I was doing audio interviews because back when we started doing multimedia presentations, it was audio with stills. I still think it's almost stronger than video some days. And then eventually I got more and more families on board, and I was comfortable presenting it to the paper. Of course, what happens? They're like, oh my God, we want to use this, but we need a writer involved, and we need it for next week. And poor old Haley Mick, who's an amazing writer at the Globe and Mail, got thrown in at the back end, and she had to scramble. And luckily, I had a whole bunch of audio interviews that I could have her listen to, so she met the families that way first. And then she went in and met them in person, and I did introductions. And then she was able to craft a brilliant story, and together it was all published as a piece. And I had to apologize profusely for having put her through that, because I had just done the exact same thing I'd been railing against my entire career. So the lesson is, a collaboration is going to always work better if you start it at the beginning and not later, okay? So a photo story, any kind of multiple images that go together. We all know by now that you can tell a story in one image, yes? Anybody dispute that? You should be trying to tell a story in one image. Some of them are very short and some of them are a lot longer. So a photo story is anything that uses multiple images to tell a story. And we tend to think of a picture story as something that's done over a shorter period of time. It can be done in an afternoon, it could be done in an hour, it could be done in a day. And then you also have something we like to refer to as a photo essay. Photo stories can be about an individual person, an event. They're much smaller in scope. Photo essays, we're talking about a longer period of time, usually about an issue, a social issue or something like that. Might be taken to multiple locations, many different subjects that all speak to the issue at hand rather than any one individual. Okay, just to differentiate the two of them. But again, both types of stories are enhanced when they include a common thread. You need to know what's your story, and that common thread has to tie them all together to make it a story. All right? One question I get asked often is, sir, can I do a story on the food bank? Well, okay, but why don't you find a story within that story? Is there a person who's volunteered there for 50 years? Is there a person who's volunteering there for the first time? Is there a person who is going to the food bank now, and at one point in time they used to work at the food bank, but they've fallen under hard times and now they need the food bank? Is there another story? So find something that you can focus on to make that story more concrete. You're still telling a story, whether it's in words or in pictures. And if you can define that more clearly in your own mind, your images are going to be stronger as a result. Because when you're capturing moments and making compositions, every image that you take and the moments that you capture lend themselves to a mood or a tone. So you need to have a sense of what that mood or tone is before you really get going too much into it, okay? This is from The Children of Bert. Yes, sir.
So I'm just wondering what your approach would be when you haven't thought about the story, and now you're going to take a photo. I'll just repeat myself. Having thought about the story,
Yep.
and now you're prepared to take the photo, do you go into that scene or that environment with a preconceived objective, like what the image is that you want?
It's a great question. We're going to get question heavy on this side, so don't you guys be shy and get involved. Great question, sir. The answer is no. The danger is actually getting too preconceived. But you do need to have an idea of what you think the story is, and then that's going to evolve. And we're going to talk about that as we go, about talking to people, doing your research, starting to formulate a better idea of what the story is in your own mind, avoiding those preconceptions, planning certain photos because you know some moments are going to happen, but you also have to leave yourself open and be flexible to how the story actually unveils itself. And the story may not be what you thought it was. And you can't just change it because it's not your story you're telling, it's their story. So you're right, there needs to be a certain amount of planning and forethought and pre-interviews, et cetera, that go into it. But you really need to just go into it with an open mind and let it flow and let it happen and capture it as it unfolds.
So would that be the same as just going out there and taking a series of photos and coming back and looking at it and saying, how does this fit my story?
It wouldn't be because if you do your research in advance, you'll have some sense of what the story should be. And those images, the images that you're going to try to capture are going to be done in such a way that it lends itself to that. For example, this image has a pretty somber tone because as much as they're recovering, I only saw one of the students recover to a point where they could head home, and it was this young lady on the right. So a lot of it is struggle and hope and fear and sadness with a little bit of enlightenment at the end of it. If I went in there not knowing that, if I went in there with the idea that, oh, these children are all recovering from brain injury, they're all going to be right, I'd be capturing more of that, and I wouldn't be showing as much of the struggle and the downside. I basically went in knowing that it was a struggle, that the odds were against most of them, but there were bright spots, and so there was a reason to fight and to go through this. And just knowing that, and then it was allowing it to just unfold in front of me, but trying to shoot it so it had just that feel to it. Did you have a question over here?
Kind of. Can you ever just go in blind though and just read the people and know what they're feeling, what they're going through?
Yeah, you can, but at some point during the process, you have to figure out what story am I telling? Because otherwise you're just going to get that collection of photos, right? So it just helps to determine how you're shooting it. Are you editorializing a little bit? Well, you are a little bit, but again, you have to make sure you're reflecting their story, not what you think it is. But going in blind, if you have lots of opportunity to go shoot, that's fine. If you can go back endlessly, that's fine. But if you go in blind to everything, what's inevitably going to happen is you're going to go look at your images at the end of the day, and you're going to go, oh, I wish I hadn't missed that. I wish I'd known they were going to do that. I wish I had another conversation about that whole process because what they did after that was amazing and I don't have it. So it's all about educating yourself, getting some plan in place, but not making it rigid. Okay, but trying to keep that tone. So that's that one. This is from a story on children suffering from a disease called cardiofaciocutaneous syndrome. Has anybody here heard of the author Ian Brown? Has anybody heard of the book Boy in the Moon? Okay, Ian Brown and his wife Johanna have a child, Walker, right here on the bottom right, and he suffers from CFC, which is a very rare genetic disorder. And this was one of those cases where the Globe and Mail came to me and said, Ian has been working on a story. He's traveled all around North America, and he's talked with families who have children who have CFC. And he's talked about their struggles, their joys, their challenges, etc. And we need you to go and do something with it. Want to go, when you want to go, communicate with the families, tell them you're following up on what Ian did before. So the Band-Aid was great. So I got to do all that, traveled all over the States. Well, we ended up doing 5 families, but it was Southern California, upstate New York, Chicago, Toronto, and San Diego, so Northern California. And I got to spend time with all the families, and it was very rewarding. And then when we came back, we secretly put together an overview story, video, and then showed it to the editors, and they're like, okay, can we get 4 more of those on the other families? Plus the one on the science, the geneticist that we interviewed. And we did that, and it was really well received. The Globe and Mail won a bunch of awards for it, and it was one of the proudest things I'm most proud of having worked on. But again, getting all these families, like this is down in Arroyo, South California, and this family, this is Emily. They were heartbroken. They were, you know, I have her mom and dad both on camera in tears because it's such a challenge to try and bring Emily up and to give her the love and not necessarily feel that love back. You know, and all of the families talked about how difficult that is. But you do it because you love your child, right? And so it's just, it's beautiful. But they also understood that when Emily is having a fit, I'm going to be there photographing it. And I didn't get to photograph this right away. There was the first time Emily had a fit, I got asked to leave the room. So I did. I left the room. We had conversations about what the ground rules were, and that's very important when you're working on something like this. All right? But it doesn't matter what the ground rules are. When the S is hitting the fan, people are going to react differently, and you have to respect that. You can't sit there and say, but you told me I could stay. All right? You just can't do it. You just say, I'm sorry, and you back out. And then afterwards, you go and say, that looks really hard, I'm sorry. And then you talk about it again. You understand that that's really difficult, but that's really an important part of this story, because I need to see you holding Emily and having a beautiful, wonderful moment, but the reader doesn't understand that as much unless they understand how terrible a moment she could be having 15 minutes sooner. All right? Walker had to wear these straight arm braces, okay, because he used to hit himself. And when he hits himself, as in Ian's words, he hits himself really hard. And then when he's upstairs, I can hear him doing it. And I was at the home that Walker lives in one day. I was shooting video, and Walker was in the shower, so they had the things off, and Walker started hitting himself. And I'm standing there. Luckily, there was a person with him, of course, and I kept rolling. And then we had to have some really hard conversations in the newsroom, because the editors in the newsroom thought, there's no way you're using that, right? I mean, it's this little guy, and he's really smacking himself in the head. And then Ian and his wife said, no, you absolutely need to use that. That is the definition of how hard it can be to raise this child. And so we debated back and forth, and we ended up giving it a treatment in video where we had normal speed of him hitting himself once, and then he went to do it again, and then we stopped it. So you got a taste of it, but not overly so. So we didn't exploit it too much, if you want to use that word. I don't feel like we exploited it at all. And we found a happy medium where people said, okay, we can live with that. That gets the message across without being, because it was so hard to watch. The video I wanted to show you, how do I get around showing this video so they can hear it as well?
Just give me a minute. We're going to have to mute your audio during it, and we will.
I'll come back to it at the end then. How's that?
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome back to this story. This is a story that we did on dementia, and this is a case where the writer was up in Ottawa, and she was doing a story on families living with dementia and different stages. For example, the gentleman in the top left there was the youngest person that we had that was suffering from dementia, and we used that picture. I was trying to do a portrait of him outside, and I don't know if I made a dumb joke or he did, and he started laughing, and I just shot through it. And his attitude towards his dementia was so healthy that we just thought that's the picture that speaks to him. And then this gentleman down here was a father who had his daughter taking care of him. This is a lady whose son was taking care of her. And this beautiful story here is a story about a wife taking care of her husband. And it's really hard to watch people in that situation. But I do want you to hear this story at the end if we have time, because what she has to say and how she says it is quite eloquent. Okay, so again, I've also done stuff overseas. And again, they're more about issues. This was a series of stories done between Sierra Leone and Liberia, talking about how they had sort of entered modern times and how they were recovering after years of war and conflict in their countries, and comparing basically a French colony versus an English colony and the difference between them and how their financial systems were working or not working. And as part of that, we also looked at how the land was suffering, how they go in and they clear cut these huge, vast areas of land so that they can grow other crops that they can sell for oil and stuff like palm oil and stuff like that because of better prices. So they're destroying all the local agriculture so they can build these huge conglomerate cash crops, and it's not a good thing. That's a rubber tree dripping the rubber from, that's still how they do it. There's a bucket down below. We'll talk about detail shots and their place in a story again. If you look at this again, the reason we're looking at mixing up scale, all right? So you constantly have to think about the different moments that you capture and the scale at which you shoot your people, okay? So that it keeps the interest of someone, of a reader, all right? And I had the pleasure of going to the Dominican Republic with a writer who's since gone on to work at a paper out west in the States and has won a bunch of sporting awards. It was a great assignment. And the story was about young kids in the Dominican. We all know that some really talented baseball players come from the Dominican Republic, but there's an awful lot of severely impoverished people there who are so desperate to make it into the big leagues that they're taking drugs that are killing them to do so. They're taking horse steroids and other drugs, and they're dying. So we went down to basically talk about how popular the game of baseball was in the Dominican, and then to talk about that. The story was called Dying to Play the Game, and that's essentially what a lot of them were doing. And again, you're looking at wide shots, tight shots, different environments, just trying to bring different elements. Okay, I'll talk more about that in a second. Okay, you want to make sure that your story is artistically strong first and foremost. Okay, it's a visual story. So if your images aren't strong, they're not going to keep the interest of the people. They're not going to look at them the way that you want them to look at them. And if there's captions that are going to play a key role in them, then you're not going to read the captions. Okay, so you want to start out being visually strong, but informative and educational, not just entertaining. Okay, it's not always easy to do that with every image, but the idea is when you take your 10,000 images at the end of the day, and you distill that down to 10 or 15 or 20, that all of those images contribute in a different way to the story as a whole without being redundant, okay? So you don't need to travel the world to do great or good, interesting stories that are going to entertain people. You don't need to work on stories for 6 months, all right? So I thought I'd do something different today. We'll see how it works. And I'm going to show you a story that you could do here in your own backyard. All right? It's straightforward. Yes, you got to get some permissions, et cetera, and there's things you can do, and I have a few stories to tell. But if you consider the things that go into strong visual storytelling, and you remember those things while you're shooting, you're going to have what you need at the end of the day to edit it down to make it a good story. Okay? So I've fleshed this out with a couple of extra examples of certain things, but let's just have a look at them. There's 5 basic shots, okay? You want an establishing shot. No different from TV, okay? When a show starts, when a movie starts, it's a nice, big, beautiful, wide-angle shot that shows you the scenery or the city that we're in, and then we do it. And they repeat that in television and film over and over again. It's no different with still images. You need to let the viewer know where we are, okay? It's not always done with a wide-angle lens, but just my own style tends towards that as much. A medium shot is nothing more than that. It's exactly that. It's a medium shot. So you're going away from that wide angle, you're getting a little tighter, you're just starting to introduce your players. A portrait, and in this case, I like to refer to them as a character portrait, and I'll explain that in a little bit more as to why that is. An action shot. We can't have the butcher story about the butcher unless we see the butcher cutting meat, right? We can't do a story about the bread baker unless we see them baking bread. It's as simple as that, all right? And details. And details are the easiest way to create interest if you're struggling with composition. You did it today, all right? That wetlands we are in today, you missed it, folks, but the wetlands we are in today, trying to get a beautiful scenic shot in there, the struggle, right? Anybody not struggle with that? I struggled with that, all right? But finding interesting details that you could shoot in abundance, right? You just had to find the right way to shoot them, all right? And I'm also going to talk about 2 different ways to shoot a detail shot, one of which wouldn't meet the criteria of your assignment, but the other one certainly does. But there are 2 ways you should remember when you're shooting details. If you get into video storytelling ever, okay, you will shoot detail shots a ton. Okay, they really come in handy everywhere. You'll see how. So this is not a picture story. This is a collection of portraits that I went to what would I call it, a fair or a convention, a bunch of 1812. Anybody in here a War of 1812 reenactor, by any chance? Okay, so these are all reenactors from War of 1812. And I just went down with a writer to this thing. We thought it'd be kind of quirky. And I shot it all on my DSLR, tried to get feature pictures. You know, there was booths set up. It was all very boring. And it was at the time when Instagram was just starting to come out with filters and stuff, and Instagram was starting to get popular. And I had my phone with me, so for S&Gs, I just thought, I'll just shoot some tight square portraits of people with that ugly green Instagram filter. And I did that. And I get back to the Globe and Mail, and my boss goes, I love these. We're going to use these instead. I'm like, oh. So that's what they did. They just put together this little portrait package, all with the iPhone. Okay, but it's not a picture story. There's commonalities here, but it's not really telling us much more than just giving us a good look at the faces involved. All right, that's not to say it's not a place for it. In 2010, I went up north. Those slides that you saw earlier with the 2 girls throat singing, and this was the layout or part of the layout that they used to tell that story. Okay, I'm just going to go through it briefly. Again, this is just an overview of the town. All right, but you don't shoot it midday. You don't shoot it when there's boring light. Try to find something that gives it a little bit of endearing qualities to it photographically. So we have a good, interesting sky. The lights are just starting to come up in the town. It's not an award-winning photo by any means, but it adds interest and it places us. All right? And again, look at the differences in scale. Okay, you've got a wide shot establishing where we are. You've got a medium shot with some action in it, and then you've got portrait. Okay, and then you just carry that on. That detail, by the way, at the bottom slide on here is, I didn't know RCMP did this, but it's actually, instead of a chalk outline in the crime scene, it's a marker on the floor where they found a footprint and a bullet casing, shotgun shell casing, and they have the date. They had the date put on the top of it. That was the weirdest little thing. Only place I've ever gone where we basically just walked into a crime scene shortly after it happened and started taking pictures. It was a little bit surreal. And then, you know, action, just hanging out, going for ride-alongs. This was in a penitentiary up there. That's a play on the word gangsta. That's Inuxta on his back, so it's a different kind of a detail shot. And then character portraits. So I might as well hit on that right now. If you go and you're working on a story and you're doing it documentary style, where you're just a fly on the wall, you insert yourself, you make some frames, you back out, you make some frames, et cetera, everything is going to be natural. Everything is going to be candid. You're not posing stuff, okay? Nothing looks rigid. It's all natural. So the last thing you want is to suddenly have a nice picture of some key character in your thing posing and lit the way that, you know, we all go and light our corporate portraits, all right? That's the last thing you want. What it does is the viewer starts looking at it. Well, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. It's a screeching halt, okay? It just breaks the complete mood and feel of your entire piece. So while you're shooting all of your images, think about the faces. Think about taking a telephoto lens and capturing some of those great faces when there's moments to be captured there. Get them candidly, get them naturally, all right? They will suit your piece far better than the posed portraits will, all right? So the story I'm going to show you grew from that weekend when I went down to that convention with the War of 1812, and I met some people, and they said, oh, you live in Hamilton, great. We're going to do our reenactment of the Battle of Stony Creek on such and such a date. You should come photograph it. So I thought, that's a great idea. What do I need to do? So we went through, and there was a few hoops to jump through. And I went down, and I spent a weekend shooting it. And so I'm just going to use some of this to talk a little bit about how you approach a story like this, and just the types of images. So this would be considered an establishing shot. It's just giving us an overview of the scene, okay? Again, when I have, so I also teach, and when I have students do stories for me, the one picture where most of them trip up and stumble and fall down, and could do a lot better, is with their establishing shots. All right? They think it's, if you're doing a story about your buddy that does stock at IKEA, they take a picture of the front of the IKEA store with the signage, right? You don't ever want to be shooting signage. There's no need of it. It's usually not the most visually interesting thing you could possibly shoot for your story. All right? You want to find something that's interesting visually.
I just give him an assignment. At Conestoga.
Did you really?
I did.
All righty.
I know, I'm a jerk.
All right, we'll talk later.
Yeah.
So find a really, really interesting way of shooting that sign if you must, okay? But go out and do it at sunset and then light it, okay? Or if it's lit, do a really long exposure and let the clouds be really cool in behind it. Do something to gussy it up, for God's sake. Thank you, Jeff. Yes?
Photograph sign, wouldn't it depend on the purpose for which you're taking that picture of the sign?
It sure would. But at some point, you're probably going to know within the story that you're at Bob's barbershop. You don't need to slap people in the... If Bob has a really cool sign, there's something about the signage or the facade. So let's take Bob's barbershop, for example. It's the example I always use. If he's got a little barbershop in downtown Hamilton, and it's stuck with a couple of brick buildings, and on one side of it's a new bank building, and on the other side of it, it's another big high-rise, right? Well, if you take a picture of the front of Bob's store, it's like taking that headshot, right? So find an interesting way of shooting it. So maybe shoot the street at sunrise or sunset, or at least during the golden hour around sunrise or sunset, when there's some interesting light to be had. Step back, maybe get low, and now you see that his barbershop is within this city that's growing up around it. So the sign is in it, but it's not of the sign. And it's adding more environment and context to the image. The image becomes much more of a storytelling element now, rather than just information, right? There's very few signs that you can look at and say, that would make a great photo, right? Especially for my assignment, when they literally only give me 5 images. So they've got to be pretty particular about which 5 they end up picking. And when they throw one away, because it's a picture of the IKEA sign, then what, right? If your buddy is doing stock at IKEA or Walmart or anything at night, go there when he arrives in his car, puts the dome light on to eat his Kentucky Fried Chicken before going in to do his shift. Now you've got this dome-lit car in the parking lot, and in the distance is this ugly building that says Walmart, but it's a storytelling image. There's lots of ways to do more than just the sign. I'm not saying don't shoot signs, it's just how do you do it? How do you incorporate some storytelling elements?
Just to be fair to my students, and
Yep.
The pictures I was making them do of signs was to have generics for business stories and that sort of thing.
Yeah, no.
Nothing, sorry.
I wasn't going to get into that.
I just thought.
I'm sure you have a reason for it. I'm not going to question that at all.
Sure you're not.
You're not going to give me that roast beef dinner tonight, now are you? All right. So again, just taking that wide and starting to narrow it down. You know, this little guy over here just minding his own business, reading an old paper-bound old book, okay, is a picture on his own. But you can take that, but also step back and now put it in context. The fact that there's some other soldiers there drilling while he's doing that, it gives it some contrast. All right. What happens, especially when we're beginning photographers, we're so caught up in what's our exposure going to be? What shutter speed should I be using? What aperture should I be using? Oh my God, I can't believe I'm here and I'm actually taking real photographs. And you get so caught up by something going on in front of you, you forget to step back. And it's so important to remember to do that. All right. You need to step back sometimes. You want to get in super tight, but you also want to step back. And then you want to step back again, and then you want to step back again. All right? And look and see what you have, because sometimes the best image is going to be way the heck back there. Okay? Sometimes you can shoot signs that do help tell a story. All right? So this is just, we know from here that there's a battle going on. As a photographer, when you see a sign that says no photography allowed, shoot it. All right? And then take a picture. All right? Because that's nonsense. My first wedding, I haven't had the second one yet, but I feel like it's coming. My first wedding was full of photographers, and we actually got married in a church where they normally don't allow photography to happen. So there were signs everywhere that say no photography. And when all of my friends started sending me photos that they'd taken during the thing, those no photography signs showed up everywhere. So everybody was thinking the same way. Again, just open spaces. You don't always have to slap your viewers in the face with your subject, right? Sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't. Just step back, okay? Medium shot, again, so now we're just changing scale, all right? This is the doctor, all right? Again, just trying to mix it up. Otherwise, you'll have everybody doing a really wide angle shot and a bunch of tight stuff. You'll have nothing in between. A medium shot's not very well defined. I can't define it. It just means you're not shooting wide, and you're not just showing me eyes. Okay, just mix up your scales. Okay, look for moments. You know, I'm going to photograph these guys that are getting ready for inspection, but there's kids also running around. So you wait, you be patient. I have pictures without her in it, but I knew she was in the area, and I'm hoping she comes running by at some point. And you wait so that when it happens, you get it. So you also have to anticipate. This isn't just a matter of me going and shooting and, oh, there happens to be a girl running through. It's if I can now get something that's a bit more storytelling. They bring their families also dress the part, they play the part, and there's kids playing around while men are playing with guns, okay? So two very different things happening, all right? Knock, 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 do you mind if I shoot while you're in your tent? Okay, can I shoot what you're doing in there, et cetera? Just trying to show a little bit. The amount of money that these reenactors spend on their kit is crazy. How do I know? Because I actually looked into it afterwards. Decided against it, but it's a lot of money, yes.
How much?
I couldn't even lay a number out. For example, the musket is probably in the thousands, because it's an actual musket that will fire. All of their stuff is tailor-made, and it's all genuinely handcrafted. The fakest item there were the bunks. They're just those fold-out Canadian Tire bunks, camp cots or whatever, but they all get covered with these woolen blankets, so you never see them and such. And I did sleep in a tent. I'm starting to tell the secret here now. I did sleep in the tent for the 3 nights that I was with these people. Okay. So portraits, again, this comes back to the character portraits. You have to imagine there's going to be some great faces in a story like this. In just about every story, there's great faces you can find. Don't overlook them, okay? Show me the face. I like to see 2 eyes in a portrait, all right? And wait for there to be a reaction. It's not just a passport photo that's dull and lifeless. So when someone is chatting, you can take pictures that show the interaction between them. But at some point, take your long lens and get yourself in a position to just shoot, until you get that wonderful, nice shot. It's not the same shooting loose and cropping into that. All right? I'm sure your instructors have talked to you about focal length and the difference between shooting with the wide-angle lens and a telephoto. It's not just about how close you can be, it's about how different the images look when you choose a different focal length. So if you shoot from back here and crop into it, it doesn't give you the same look as if you shoot it tighter to begin with, okay? So try to shoot your images tight in the way you want them in the end. And there's portraits to be had everywhere, right? Not just the old folks that were there, the little ones. I don't know what this kid was thinking when they was looking at me, but yeah, I can imagine. I should put this in a caption contest, right? Who is Peter Power? Yeah. And again, there's different ways to shoot portraits. Not every portrait has to be done with the telephoto lens. All right. So this isn't what I would call, or what you would call, or what any of us would call an environmental portrait, but it is shot differently. It's differently framed, etc. Composition, we talk about rules of composition, and I only think of them in terms of as rules, because rules are made to be broken, and compositional rules are meant to be broken. They are great guidelines to get you going in the right direction when you're doing your photography, to get you started, okay, while you're learning. But eventually, you start looking at something and going, oh, that looks good that way, but what if I do this? And that's where your own style starts to develop. And you might not even know why. I don't know why that works, but it works. So I'm going to go with it. It feels right to me. All right? Sometimes people will ask me, how do you know when to press the button? Well, I say, I don't. I just press the button and it just shoots. And no, I don't do that. It is timing. But sometimes when you're looking at something that's developing in front of you, my back's killing me right now, so I can't even bend down. But say you're working a subject while something is happening, and you're constantly shooting, you're waiting for the moments to develop, you're cleaning up the background by moving your position to block something or to get it out of your frame. And all of a sudden, it's just all there. The moment's there, the expression's there, the background is clean, and you're pressing it, and you know in the back of your mind right there, that was it. That was it. And it's not so much that you've studied what you're looking at, you didn't chimp, okay? You just feel it. It just feels like, it's like, oh, there it is, boom, boom, that was great. You might keep shooting because you never know how the moment's going to evolve, but you're going to know, even before you ever open up Photo Mechanic or Lightroom or whatever, you know to go straight to that moment because you could feel it when you shot it, okay? So this is a little odd in terms of composition. And action. These guys are out playing soldiers and killing one another, right? So we need to see that a little bit. So how do you shoot it? You don't need any faces even, okay? The muskets can tell the story, all right? Mixing up technique as well. You don't want everything to be static. If they're moving, let's show movement. Have you guys talked in your course about using slow shutter speeds to show movement in photographs? Okay, it's a great technique. I do it all the time. You end up wasting a lot of photos because you don't get it to work. But when you get them to work, they're interesting to look at. And that's our goal, right? We want to show people images that are fresh, and it's not the way they've seen it 20 times before. It's not the way Jeff shot it. It's not the way you shot it. It's not the way you shot it. It's just, oh, it's unique. It might not be better, but it's good and it's unique. So it's now fresh to the viewer. You notice I keep talking about the viewer, right? I had a teacher when I was at journalism school, and every now and then he would start pounding on the desk as he leaned and looked towards us because we were talking about why a picture worked or why we do a certain thing. And what he wasn't hearing any of us say was because the viewer will understand it better or the viewer will appreciate it better. Remember, I'm not shooting these pictures for my own gratification. I'm shooting them to communicate. So the viewer, the end person, needs to appreciate and understand what I'm shooting, right? I'm not just shooting something to, oh, it's about me, okay? I know some photographers who I have great respect for, and some of their pictures, you look at them and it's like, it's all technique, but it tells me nothing about the subject. And so there's room for both. But I personally feel that if you can have an image, especially in a documentary setting, that's more about the subject and less about what you are doing, the better, okay? And again, just trying another pan in a different case. Pans are great, but you also risk missing everything trying them, right? But the more you try it, the better you're going to get. The better you're going to get a sense of what's going to work. And then your percentage of success is going to go up and up and up and up and up. It's not bad. I'm almost up to an hour, and I'm going to be finished easily in time. Okay. Again, working your subjects, right? Not just from the front. What do I want to show? Moving around. I like to, when you're in an environment where you just get to shoot away and to document what's happening in front of you, I liken it to a little bit of a dance. All right? Because number one, you're not going to have, first and foremost, you're not going to have 5-foot-itis, which means you're not going to look at what's happening in front of you, stand up at 5 foot tall, 4 foot tall, 6 whatever, and go click. That's just documenting what's in front of you. You might as well be taking a passport photo, right? Well, what you're going to do is you're going to go click. Now I have something in case it ends. And then you're going to start that little dance. And you're going to start moving around and bobbing and weaving and getting yourself in a position. And you're going to be studying the scene as it evolves. And you're going to be pressing the shutter and making pictures all the while. And starting to think, oh, I need to get over here. I need to get over here. And you're shooting and shooting and shooting all the while. And you see things evolve in front of you. Okay? So when something like this happens, you're there, you're in the right position, and you get it. That's just finding dirt inside someone's musket. I can really relate to this because my 5 years in the Canadian military, I lived that just in a different uniform. And the all-important detail shots. Don't pass them up, okay? These details are pretty unique and interesting, and it's kind of hard to go wrong. The problem with this detail shot is that there's just so much in there, all right? Nothing jumps out at us as being the subject of this shot. This image, actually, I put it in the PowerPoint. I should have went in and changed the crop because there's more of the photo, and that photograph, if anything, would become the centerpiece of that photograph if I put it right on the slide. So that's my bad there. I apologize for that one. And there's different ways to shoot detail. So when we were out in the woods today, I promised you I was going to talk to you about the 2 different ways to shoot detail. So let's just go back to portraits quickly. All right. So when we go to shoot a portrait, what focal length do we think of as a portrait lens in general?
50 millimeters.
A 50, yeah, is good. An 85, 135 maybe, right? A medium, a standard lens or a telephoto lens, generally we think, right? With shallow depth of field, isolate our subject, focus on the eyes, right? Have nothing else distracting, good light, and maybe a little moment, right? Doesn't have to be dramatic, but it's going to be a look in the eye, a turn of the cheek or something. A nice portrait. And that's very much like you go and shoot a detail of a beautiful dead leaf still hanging on a tree, and you get out your telephoto lens and you shoot that leaf and it's a soft, out of focus background, etc. Looks really nice, right? But the second way to shoot details, and try it. You should do it both ways. Sometimes it works for some things and not others, especially if you're storytelling, is to use your wide angle. Okay? It's kind of like that environmental portrait. Have we done environmental portraits? Okay, so an environmental portrait, okay, is generally done with a wide angle lens. We generally want to get a little bit closer to our subject than COVID comfortable, okay? So that our subject starts to become dominant in the frame. But because you're shooting it with a wide angle lens, you're including environment. You're including some background. So you try to do it in such a way that the background lends itself to telling a little bit about the person, what they do, where they are, etc. Okay? An example might be a portrait. An example might be a portrait. Am I getting too close there?
No, I was just going to do the framing up of you.
Oh, the portrait. Well, welcome to my environment. You know, you take that barber in the barber shop, all right, and you wait for him to leave the chair, and he walks towards the nice, beautiful bay window, looking out on the street, right? And he goes over and he sits there for a while because he doesn't have anyone in his store, and he's just sitting there, kind of looking out at the street. And you're standing there with your back to the window, the wide angle lens, shooting him, because the light's coming from there and you're here, you got some nice shadow on the side of his head and light on his face, you expose for that. But in behind, we see the barbershop. But he's huge in the frame because we have that wide angle lens. So that's an environmental portrait, okay? There are other ways to shoot them. You don't always have to be on top of the person you're photographing, but that's one type. So if you take that to details, all right, you can shoot that leaf in the forest that's hanging on by a thread, that big, beautiful leaf, and get really close to it with that wide angle lens. You still have an out of focus background, but now what do you see? You see some other trees, you see the outline of the S curve of the trail going past it, and now that leaf is suddenly not a leaf just sitting on its own, but it's a leaf in the forest with a trail, and it has some context, okay? So think about how you can use shooting a detail shot that way to provide context to the broader story, okay? It's part of the storytelling. And you can do it both ways, and this certainly plays for both, okay? So you see both of these in very different way. I wanted to show the intricate carving on the musket and just the shoulder patch and the threading and such on the soldiers, okay? So you're going to cultivate your images as they appear in front of you in chronological order, let's say, okay? But remember at the end when you're editing your stories, you don't have to present them that way. You're going to present your images in the way that will have most impact and communicate best the story you're telling. If that starts out, if you're doing a story about, childbirth in Africa, and the image that has most impact is, this really Spartan operating room and a woman on the table and a doctor holding up a crying baby, then that's your lead picture, all right? But it's probably the last thing you shot, all right? Because after that, the woman says, you didn't actually let him in here to shoot that, get him out of here. And then you're done, okay? That didn't happen. She was fine with me being there, by the way. So think about what way you're going to present them. And if you're doing it in terms of slides, okay, one after the other, again, think about that changing of scales and moment. Okay, you want to present them in an order that makes sense, but you also don't want it to look like an Instagram page, square, 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 square. Mix it up. Let me look at a face. Let me look at a big environment. Let me look at a detail. Let me look at a medium action shot, and so on. Mix it up. It's going to keep my interest. It's going to inform me. All right? Is that as small as it looks to me? You need to think about shooting with a consistent style as well. And that goes back also to the portrait. Remember, we're not just going to do the posed portrait. That goes with all the other candid shots. So when I shoot just about everything that I shoot documentary-wise, I'll carry 2 camera bodies, and my focal length, my preferred focal length is the 24, 1.4, and on the other one, I'll have an 85, 1.2. And that's what I shoot with. And because the reason I do that is twofold. Number one, I love shooting with that shallow depth of field. I shoot a lot with shallow depth of field and slow shutter speeds, where I risk getting images lost because of motion, but when you get it, again, it's different. It looks better. Well, it looks unique at least. All right. But I'm also intimately aware of what my working distance is with a 24mm lens. I know exactly, if I'm standing here, I know I'm going to get from there to there without ever picking up the camera. I know how close I need to be to you with the 85 if I want to get your eyes, etc. It's better. I know the working distances. I'm comfortable with those focal lengths, the angles of view that they give me, and I like the look of them. So that's what I shoot with. If I'm doing news photography, it's a 16 to 35 on one shoulder and a 70 to 200 on the other, right? I need that flexibility, and so you do it. The funny thing about focal zoom lenses, unless you're Jeff and I and you're stuck at Film Fest behind a red cordon, okay, you use your zoom lens because you want to frame it a little bit better when people are posing, because you can't exactly be where you want to be. But if you have freedom of movement, you're either going to use the 16 or the 35. No, you're not. You're going to use the 16. You're either going to use the 70 to 200, the 70 or the 200. No, you're not. You're going to use the 200. You might as well have a 16 and a 200 in your pocket if you have freedom of movement, because the 16 is going to give you that the best of what a wide angle lens will give you in that moment. So use your feet to frame your photo. And the same thing, would I prefer to shoot with a 70 or a 200? Well, I think the 200 is going to give me more of the characteristics that the 70 is going to give me. So I might as well shoot with the 200. So just arrange yourself accordingly. It's just an opinion. But I know that I put wide angle lenses on, and if I have a choice, I'm either at the wide end or the long end, and nowhere in between. That's just me. Okay, so you want to mix up your focal lengths, incorporate some different compositional techniques. You want to look for those key moments that are going to tell your story, right? And again, that comes from educating yourself. It comes from those conversations that you have while the story is unfolding, so that you're getting further and further educated about what you're shooting while you're shooting it, so you know what's coming next. You're constantly saying, chef, what's next? Okay, you're doing that, what do you do next? Is the bread going in the oven next? No, the bread's going to sit on the table for a while. I'm going to go back for a smoke in the alleyway. Oh, brilliant. I'm going out to have a check of the alleyway, right? Oh my God, the alleyway's really cool. There's all kinds of cool graffiti. There's one light above. The sun's going down. I'm just going to wait for the chef now. Out here, out comes the chef. The door opens. The light floods the place. Boom, 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 boom. Door closes. He stands against the wall underneath that one lamp and all his white baker stuff. Has a cigarette. It's a cool picture. It speaks to the fact that the poor chef is, cooking for 8 hours and he gets one 15-minute break, if that's the case, right? But you're gonna look for those key moments. You're gonna be redundant while you're shooting, so don't say, "Oh, I already shot that." Shoot it again, but maybe shoot it with a different focal length or from a different area, different angle. Get high, get low, get closer, move back. You're going to shoot those moments over and over and over again as they evolve, all right? So you're going to be redundant when you're shooting. It's when you're editing, you can't be redundant. That's where you're going to be very specific. When you get down and you're starting to look and you're like, I really like that, and I really like that, and I really like that, but it's the same thing. I'm not telling the reader anything new in any of these images, so I can't include 2 of the 3. I certainly can't include all 3. So which one do I like best? What does this one have over this one? What does this one have over this one? And that's a whole other issue, as how you edit, you get your volume down, and then how do you pick the best ones for telling your story, okay? Look for a range of information and emotion. Emotion is difficult, okay? You're not always going to get emotion, but you really have to look for it, and sometimes it's subtle. All right, if you're not in a situation where it's a baby being born and everybody's super happy, or it's a funeral and everybody's super sad, then you're looking for other things: interest, concern, worry, all right, contemplation. They all look different in body language, eye expression, facial expressions, so keep an eye out and shoot them, okay? They make a difference between a bland photo and a really interesting photo. Okay, yes?
When you're laying out the story, do you use a storyboard, or does the editor do that for you? Or?
I'm glad you asked that question, because I was going to talk a little bit about that story I did, the black and white that you looked at the beginning. And in my career, one of the problems with working at the biggest newspaper in the country, and then the other one calls itself the biggest newspaper in the country, Canada's national newspaper, was that I didn't really have a lot of opportunities for really close mentorship. I was the one getting asked, can you mentor me? Can you do this? Can you do? But I didn't really have it. And I had an opportunity when I did that first trip up north. I was working with a guy at the Globe very briefly named Tom Slukovany, who's a Reuters photographer. And Tom was back in Toronto for a while, and he was having sort of a close relationship because Reuters owned the Globe for a while. There was a while where the Globe was in a revolving door of owners. Anyways, Reuters was heavily involved, Thomson Reuters. And I said, Tom, I'd love, and I respect Tom a lot, and he's a little bit further ahead of me in my career. And I said, can you help me with the edit on this stuff? And so what we did was he allowed me to go and pick the images that I felt were best, and we had a lot. And we had them all printed 11 by 14. And we literally went and laid them down on the studio floor, so we had them all laid out. And we started going around going, need them, got them, need them, got them, literally just pushing pictures aside. And having some really good conversations about, well, we need to keep that because, And then, oh, well, do we really need to keep it because? Is it that important, or can we do without it, and what's it going to take a place of? And we started paring it down, and it was a really, really great experience to have someone look that closely at my work. And you don't get that too much these days with digital photography, because photographers are doing so much of it on their own now. So editors see the final 5 that they want to send them, right? Even with me, my editors that, I go to a football game, I might send them 20, 25 images on the night. Well, I'm doing that edit really quickly. No one's ever looking at everything else to see what I don't have, or how I shot it, or what I could learn from them looking at what I shot. It's invaluable, and beginning photographers don't get that as much today. But I've gone off on a little bit of a tangent. I saw a bit of a squirrel there. So we took those images and we pared it down and pared it down. And it literally at the end came down to, what's our lead image? We need to have that. We need to have that. That'd be a good ending. All right? This is important. That's not. That's great, but it's kind of over here as well. So you're looking at what images are going to add value visually and what images are going to add value with information and emotion, and that's where you don't want to get redundant. Remind me to tell a story about captions after, Jeff, before I end this thing, because it's a quick story. It'll be a good way to end this thing. You're going to continue to communicate. You communicate before you do your story. You communicate during the story, all right? Because you need information as well if you're doing journalism, especially, or storytelling, because you need to write good and proper captions. Be patient, all right? Remember, the story is not yours. The story is theirs. It's going to unfold at the rate it's going to unfold. But you use your downtime to look at what you've done, to figure out what else you can do differently, how you can do it better, to snoop around, to climb up on stuff, to walk down hallways, to start looking at what you can possibly shoot, okay? And go early, stay late. It's a good rule with everything that you do, everything, every assignment. I'll go back to the barbershop again, right? You go and say that, the barbershop that's worked in downtown Hamilton for 30 years, and you say, I'd love to come do a story at your barbershop, and the barber doesn't know photography. So the barber says, yeah, that's fine, no problem. You're going to have to ask the customers if you can take their picture. Yep, no problem, I can do that. What time do you open? I open at 9 on Monday. Okay, great, I'll see you at 9. So the photographer shows up at 9, and the lights are on, and the barber's there, and he goes, oh, you're here on time, great to see you. What you missed was that at 8, when the sun was just peeking up down the street, all right, the barber was walking down the road with his coffee and his little bag of Danish and his newspaper under his arm. And he goes in, opens the door, turns on the lights, puts the stuff down, sits in the chair where his clients are all going to be, puts his feet up, reads the morning paper, and has his coffee. One of the best pictures of the day that speaks to who the barber is and his routine. But you've missed it because you didn't go. And trust me, that's kind of a made-up story. It's very possible. But I know just about every photographer I know has gone early to something with the hope that they might get something different and unique in storytelling. And they've stayed late to do the same thing, and they've been rewarded for doing so. So think about that. Yes?
That's the only time you're actually going to get them sitting. That's the only time you're actually going to get them sitting.
Yes, the barber? Yeah, for sure, because the rest of the time they're jawing and cutting hair and doing their stuff. But you don't want to miss those things. When you're speaking to, I'm going to be able to rip through a bunch of slides here in a minute because we've talked about some of the stuff that's coming up on them. But when you're speaking to your subjects, you're going to be probing for, well, what does your day look like, and what do you do, and how does that work, and can I photograph that, and does it look like anything? But they don't know photography. They don't know light. They don't know moment, right? So they're going to tell you, but they're not going to tell you all of the things that are going to make some of your best photos because they don't get it, right? So all of a sudden you're sitting there and you're like, you're doing what? Oh, hang on a second. I got to get a picture. This is amazing, right? And luckily, hopefully you don't miss it and you can get it, or you can get it tomorrow or the next year or whatever. But you want to keep that conversation going. Don't rely on post-production, okay? Get your images right in camera. Get your cropping right in camera. I don't care that the images today are 24, 36, 50 megapixels. I don't care. You don't want to go cropping too much into any of your images, again, because it changes the complete look. Okay, so if you want a wide image, shoot a wide image. If you want a medium image, shoot a medium image. If you want a tight image, get in there and shoot that tight image. All right? You're not wasting film. Okay, none of us are paying for film anymore. I'm not anyway. Well, I am, but not when I'm working. Okay, so make sure you get it right in camera. You need to understand what your tools are. Your camera, get comfortable with doing it. And if not, you use that downtime between those moments to figure out your next steps so that you're somewhat prepared. And remember that storytelling is cooperative, right? I started out the day talking about 2 stories that I did where I got permission from one family to participate, and then over time you build on that. Somebody is allowing you into their lives, all right? Sometimes that's very intimate, other times it's not so intimate, okay? But either way, it's a privilege to be able to do that. So you have to work with them. It's not about your story, it's about their story. So work with them. I need this, I need that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'll go out on a limb right now. I don't set stuff up as a journalist. But I'll tell you, if I had a guy woodworking in his shop and there was a window over there and a window over there and he was in the middle doing something, I might say, George, do you ever do that? Do you need to do that right there? No, I do this all over the shop. All right, I'm going to photograph you next time when you're doing it near one of the windows, okay? And George might just go, oh, I'll do that now for you. And George will just saunter 4 feet down to the left and start doing it. Now I got some beautiful rim light on him, and away we go, okay? You're not setting it up. Don't set stuff up. It's not going to look right anyway. All right. So again, playing with compositions, okay? Far from being a customary composition, but we know where the subject is, how he's framed, and we get a sense of where they are. All right? Tight shots. Long lens, faces. Don't forget them. Trying to find things and shoot them a different way. Framing is always good, with wide angle lenses especially. With wide angle lenses, put something in your foreground. All right? But with a long telephoto lens, you can also get things in your foreground that obscure the background, etc. You have to understand your camera to do this. If you're not manually focusing, then you better understand how to move that focus point around in your viewfinder, so that your camera is going to focus where you want it to focus to make this picture, okay? Pardon? Oh, I dropped the card from, there we go. Thank you, that's Vinay's card from this morning. All right, framing foreground, again, right? Just wide angle lens, make it interesting. Look for quirky and different moments that are unexpected. I got to pay attention here because I'm going to give away something in a second accidentally. All right, and again, you want to keep the style similar throughout your shoot. All right, I'm a big fan of, if you're shooting a child, get down on the child's level. If you're shooting a dog, get down on the dog's level, right? It's a good practice. And I tried that in this case, but everything was just too messy and jumbled in behind. So I cleaned up the background by staying up, but then by staying up, it just kind of made her look even smaller, right? And more innocent, and just a little hand on the, and it just isolated it just by changing the perspective a little bit. All right, again, just changing how you're looking at it to clean it up. All right, and light. Okay, when there's beautiful light, start shooting like crazy. Take advantage of it. It won't last long. Shoot, 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 shoot. Remember, every time we're exposing a subject, everything that we're doing, composition, exposure, it's all about drawing the eye to the subject. So the subject needs to be exposed properly, not the trees, not the tents, not the grass, your subject, all right? Doesn't matter what happens to anything else in the frame, doesn't matter. Yep. Those are the little tents that we slept in, yep. I'll go through this quickly. We talked about ground rules, being honest with people about intentions, discussing story moments. All of this I've talked about. If you can find a story that you're interested in personally, it's really a huge help. All right, if you like rock and roll, do a rock and roll story. Okay, if you like farming and farmers, go do a farm story. They're right here in the backyard, you can do them. Just pick it. All right, I bet you any money that you can pick a direction, northeast, south, and west, get in your car, and within 15 minutes, you'll find something that if you just walked up to the front door and said, hey, I'd like to do a photo story about you. You might want to introduce yourself first, all right? What I want to do, you'll be able to find something that's interesting there and tell that story, all right? That's what we used to do in Belleville. Every time we had to go shoot a story, we'd just head out into the country. We'd find something that just looked interesting, and then we'd go meet the people that lived there, and 9 times out of 10, they were interesting as well, and we could make a story out of them, okay? Continue to plan and adapt as you go, but like we said in the beginning, to your question, be open to changes, okay? Stories rarely work out exactly as you expect them or plan them, so you need to be flexible, keep an open mind, all right? It's crazy how some of these people look the part, all right? I don't know what they were doing, but they really, really, really looked the part, okay? Okay, pitfalls to watch out for are those unconnected moments that mean nothing. Okay, so be careful about that. Every image must provide value related to the theme of your story. And you want to avoid repetitive moments and repetitive captions. I love it when I get the question, sir, do all our captions have to be different for these 5 photos? Darn sure, but they better be different because otherwise the images are all the same, right? So maybe it's a good time to tell the caption story. Almost. All right, so you want to pick, this is the moment of death on the battlefield. I'll tell you how I shot these shortly, okay? I'm not going to go into finding a story. So what I did for this story is I got permission to sort of embed with them, like you would with the military. You'd go with a unit, you'd go and they would bring you in and they'd take you on everything they do and you get to shoot the story from the inside. So they said I could come, but I had to stay there. I'm like, okay, how does that going to work? Well, we'll dress you up as a period gentleman. So I got there and they had a pants and a waistcoat and a vest and a top hat. I was wearing a beard at the time. And they gave me a little canvas haversack to put, it fit 1 camera and 1 lens. All right. And I had to take the lens off because it just looked too bulky. So whenever I was walking around camp, I was basically dressed like this period gentleman. When I saw something that I wanted to shoot for a while, I'll put out the camera, put it together, and I'd start shooting, and then I put it back in. Because all the while, on the periphery of this camp, are the public who are coming to watch this spectacle, right? So they didn't want me to be an eyesore. And trust me, I can be an eyesore. And the funny thing was, and I don't usually talk about my brief stint in the military, but it tends to come out sometimes. And by day 2, I had the sergeant major say to me, "You're ex-military, aren't you?" And I'm like, "Maybe." And he goes, "Do you want to wear one of our uniforms?" And I go, "Pardon?" He goes, you can be a soldier if you want. And I'm like, "Well, how's that going to work? I'm here to work. I'm here to make pictures." He goes, "You can do both." And I said, "Okay." He said, "You want to get out onto the battlefield, right?" And I said, "I do." He said, "You can't do that as a gentleman. So if you want to get on the battlefield, you're going to have to be a soldier." So I said, "Okay, fine." He goes, "You got to shave your beard." No problem. So I go to the bathroom, I shave off my beard, I come back. In my tent is a uniform waiting for me. I get dressed up. There's 2 uniforms. There's a white tunic and a red tunic. I get dressed up, and then they said, "Okay, let's go." And I'm like, "Where are we going?" He goes, "We're going to teach you drill." So I actually had to go and learn how to do drill with the muskets, which was not totally foreign to me. I'd done drill in the military, but it's different drill, as you can imagine. But we went through how to do it, and I passed muster. And the next thing you know, I was literally in the ranks when they marched to the local cenotaph. That's a memorial to the people that died during the Battle of Stony Creek in 1812. And they do a memorial ceremony. So I marched with them in ranks. I was quite honored to do so. Then when we got there, I fell out of ranks, took out the camera, started making pictures. And then before we left, I got back in the ranks and marched back with them again. And that was great. And then I just went around and did my thing again as a soldier. But the next day for the battle, the final battle, I stood in ranks. I was in the front rank, and the camera was down here on my side. The public is all lined up over there. And the idea was that I would fire. We'd fire our first volley, and then we were going to advance on the enemy, the Americans on the other side of the field. And we were going to stop again, fire again. And then as we went to start marching the second time, when the Americans fired, I was going to be hit. So we've now advanced a little bit. It's my turn to go down. I feign death on the battlefield. I go down, I fall away from the crowd. My musket's back here somewhere. I pull out the camera and I start making quick pictures laying on my side. Luckily, I had another soldier fall near me. I shot this picture. I have other pictures of the other soldiers walking away and leaving us in the dust kind of thing. And then at the end, the band walks out to do this memorial to the dead. And they happen to walk right out on top of where I was laying. And I'm like, I can't believe my luck right now. And I'm just shooting away and shooting away and shooting away. And it never would have been possible had I not gone in and at least played a little bit of a part and shaved my beard and wore a uniform. So it turned out far better than I anticipated. So just a fun little thing. We talked about finding stories. I don't want to drag on too much. We talked about finding a story within the story to make it more interesting and more real and different, unique. Emotion is the best way to connect with your viewers, okay? So anytime you can find some emotion somewhere, whether it's good or bad, happy or sad, emotion is the key, okay? A little bit of planning. Oops, I gave it away. So there's me with the King's Shilling. Back in the War of 1812, they used to recruit people. If you accepted the King's Shilling, you were in the army. So they'd offer you a beer. Little did you know there was a shilling at the bottom of the beer. You swill your beer. Suddenly you realize there's a coin in your mouth. You pull it out. You have the King's Shilling. You're now in the army, boy. And off you go, okay? So that's exactly what they gave to me. And we played with the little King's Shilling afterwards. I don't do pictures of myself very often as mementos for my shoots, but this one was kind of unique and different. So if you want to see traditional storytelling at its best, go look at some work by W. Eugene Smith, often known as the godfather of visual storytelling, okay? His work on The Country Doctor is classic and will remain classic for the end of time, and it's still the way we approach things today. And his work in Minamata was a mind-blowing demonstration of commitment to a story, both in terms of the time he committed to it and his physical sacrifice because he got beaten to near death trying to work on it. Okay, so that work is there and it's worth having a peek at. I think we're okay to probably wrap it up at this point. Does anybody have any questions before we end it? Yep.
I don't know if you answered this, but where did that fourth thing take place?
So that's the Battle of Stony Creek in Hamilton.
Oh.
Well, it's actually Stony Creek, but it's part of the city of Hamilton. It happens every year, same time, Google it. It's a lot of fun. You can go do it. I know that down this way, there's a lot of reenactors coming from this part of the province, and there are battles that get reenacted near you down here as well. Yeah, so look them up, contact the people involved, say, this is what I'd like to do, and you can go do a similar story. I'm sure you'd have a lot of fun doing it. Anything else? Pardon me? Oh, caption story, quickly then. I'll come back to your question then, okay? I don't want to name names here. So if you know the names of the person involved, don't shout it out. But there's a contest called the Pictures of the Year International or the PO, Pictures of the Year International. It's an international photo competition for journalism. And a really good friend of mine, ours, they were doing the live judging, so you can watch while the judging is happening. And you always watch it and you see your photos and then you don't go to the next round and you kind of sink. And then a very good friend of mine, his pictures made it into like the third from last round. And I was all excited for him. And I even texted him and said, dude, you're in the third round or whatever. And he's like, great. And what's happening now, it's like editing. Now the judges are looking a lot more carefully at the photographs. Remember, this is a journalism competition for storytelling. And the pictures in the story were incredible. And this person deserved better. But at that stage, the judges say, okay, let's look at the captions. So they bring up the picture. There's 10 pictures allowed in each story. They bring up the picture and someone reads the captions and they move on. And anyways, up come the photos and the caption starts to be read and I'm sitting there And I'm going, oh God. And this photographer is younger than me. I dare to say I mentored him a little bit, but all of a sudden the captions were just terrible, terribly written. Just dropped the ball in the captions and didn't move on. Wasn't even a conversation about it, just was out. And then it went on, and then they announced the winners. And we make jokes about it today, about how he had this incredible story, but didn't use that one little piece of journalism to really give value to each image and why each image added to the whole story. So visually, it was incredibly strong, but people still need to understand the story and why this image of this stone wall has value in this 10 images, right? And so because the captions weren't written well, that's what got that photographer's work ousted from that competition. Otherwise, they were looking at, still got an honorable mention, but would have been top 3 or first had the captions been written well. What was your question?
Some of the stories you showed us, very emotional, heart-wrenching stories. As a photographer and getting involved, I'm sure, if you're around for a while doing that, you're getting, you kind of get sucked into a little bit. How do you manage that? How do you manage not breaking down while you're working, or how do you go home and deal with all that at night? That's going to take a lot out of you doing some of these stories.
I think that everybody reacts differently. As you saw today, I almost got emotional talking about one story. I don't subscribe to the idea that the camera protects you from what's happening in front of it at all. And the reason for that is if you're working the way I like to work, when you see something going on, you're not just pressing buttons and capturing it. You're actually looking harder at it than anybody else that's there. You're examining it. You're looking at moments. You're looking at pain. You're looking at joy. You're looking at sorrow. You're examining it because that determines how you shoot it, when you press the button and stuff. So you can't isolate yourself from it. So you need to have a little bit of that humanity. I'll come back to you. So you need to have that humanity. You can't just become a cold fish and just start shooting it and not be attached. And yeah, those stories do get to you, and maybe that has a cumulative effect. I don't know. I worked in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake, and I was down there 24 hours after the earthquake struck. And that assignment was the hardest logistically, physically, and emotionally that I had ever done. And I'll tell you I was there, but to this day, I have never, except to my colleagues in a very close-quartered environment, spoken about that assignment. So you do get affected by it, but I try to think of it more as an enrichment. In our lives, we all have good things happen to us, sad things, bad. It's all a part of life. It helps us to grow and experience. And I get to experience the things in my life that I value and cherish. And I got to turn this down. Someone's whistling at me. Anybody have any guesses who? Don't tell her what I said about weddings. Oh God, I'm being live streamed here.
I don't think we gave her the link.
No, hopefully she doesn't have the link. I got kind of lost there. Anyways, you can't separate yourself from it, and you just try to, it's an honor, basically, when someone lets you into their lives, and I try to think of it that way. The first palliative care story that I did, okay, this beautiful woman was dying of cancer, and her husband was at her side. I got a phone call from them saying, we think mom's gonna go, you better get over here. So I did. I raced over. I kind of stood in the periphery, and they're like, oh, Peter's here, let him in. And the family's kind of parting, so I could come into this little tiny room, so I could be present. So what I did is so I photographed a little bit of the husband saying goodbye, and then I just backed up into a corner. There was a chair, so I kind of just got up onto the chair so I could get a little bit higher. And I just stayed there, and I just very quietly, as the family was coming and going and gathering around, just making frames. And then she finally passed away, and I lost it. So I just kind of said, that's enough for me. And I got down and I went outside the room, and I was outside the room in tears. And two of the family members came out and put their arms around me and go, are you okay? And I'm like, oh my God, like your mother just died and you're worrying about how I am. Like, what does that say about that family, right? They're just a wonderful, generous family. And they understood that the story that we were telling was not about death, but it was about life and how you make value in those last few weeks, months, days, hours of a life, right? So I don't know, some people might say that there's lingering effects of the things I've covered over the years. I don't think so. I think I've just been enriched because of it, to be honest. What was your question?
It wasn't really a question, it was kind of just like a comment in a sense, because like, wouldn't you want to be on that level where you're actually feeling in a sense of what they're feeling?
Oh, yeah.
Because you can be empathetic and you can actually capture the real moments because you can feel their stories that they're actually telling.
That's 100% accurate.
Yeah.
That's 100. If you're not feeling it, listen. For every photograph that you're going to take ever in your lifetimes, the whole purpose in taking that photograph is if it's because you were excited, impressed, sad, frightened, whatever it was, the only reason you're taking that photograph is so you can share that with someone else. And what do you want? You want them to have that same reaction that you had in that moment, right? And that's a very personal thing. So if you're not feeling something from what you're shooting, then why are we shooting it?
Yeah, and even if you
Right.
kind of take it home, at least, you know, you got at that moment, you got to experience it, like just, you know, to really feel the emotion.
Yep. And that's why I say I've just been enriched by experience, because I haven't just lived my life. I've gotten the privilege of being present to see love and joy and sorrow and loss and excitement and celebration in so many other people's lives in my career. It's a blessing. It really is a blessing. And I don't think that's cliche or kitschy or anything like that. It truly is a blessing. I've gotten to experience many, many different lifetimes in little tiny bits. Last thing is, when I always joke that my job as a photojournalist is kind of like living in an encyclopedia. I can't write a doctorate thesis on anything I've experienced, but I can talk about just about anything under the sun at the dinner table, because I've got little bits of nice little insight and information into an awful lot of things, right? So it's been a real honor and a pleasure and a privilege. And the same goes for having me here today. I want to thank you for your time and your patience and your interest and your questions. All right, I wish you all good luck. Hey, work hard and you'll get what you want out of this career. All right, that's it.
Thanks, Peter. I wanted to just check and see if we got any questions from the peanut gallery. No, I'm kidding. My Conestoga students. Any of you guys have anything to say? I know you're usually a pretty quiet bunch, but anybody got anything? Jump in.
The joys of online teaching.
Yes.
It's a
exactly.
struggle.
Okay. I don't say anything. Mo, did you need to, you want to jump in here and wrap anything up?
Sure, Jeff and Peter, that was fantastic. I've learned so much, Peter. I have to go back to school now. That was awesome.
Thanks, Mo.
You may want to go back. No, that was fantastic, guys. Sorry, I'm losing my voice here. But again, thank you so much. Thank you for your time, the students of both Conestoga and Lambton College, and look forward to connecting with you once we're able to do so. And hopefully this session was a learning experience for you. Got a lot from it. And thanks again.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody online. I really appreciate you guys coming and doing this. Oh my goodness! Now I've got. This was intimidating. I didn't realize how bad that was.
Welcome to my world.
Yeah. So I really appreciate you guys coming in. I know it's your normal class time for my Conestoga students, but thank you very much for showing up today. Appreciate that. And for everybody in the room, I really appreciate you guys being here too. And thanks to Sony for helping bring Peter here today, because he's a busy dude. So it's always nice to have him So if people here in the room have any other questions, that's great. If my Conestoga students have anything they need to talk to me about, please do so via email. I'll get back to you tonight. All right. For now, I think that's all. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Jeff.